Hi guys, welcome back for part 3 of my Ever After High retelling series. In this part, we will be covering everything that happens in the book A Wonderlandiful World by Shannon Hale, and then the book after that, which is Next Top Villain by Suzanne Selfers, and also a few of the webisodes. This episode of the Ever After High retelling series is called Lizzie Gets Character Development, and the reason it's called that is because A Wonderlandiful World, Next Top Villain, and the webisodes we are covering all actually have a lot to do with Lizzie's character development, and I feel like people who haven't read the books often don't get the full picture of her character development because so much of it is off screen. Of course, we will also be getting a lot of tea on other characters, namely Cedar, Maddie, and Duchess. We will also be getting a lot of tea on Daring and Lizzie's relationship because in the show, they kind of made it seem like it was like a one-off thing just for like one episode, but no, like it was a plot line that went through both A Wonderlandiful World and Next Top Villain of like Daring trying to get with Lizzie and like Lizzie kind of like ignoring him. And I honestly, after reading A Wonderlandiful World and Next Top Villain, think that the ship is kind of underappreciated, and it's kind of just sad that we never saw like what happened before Daring decided to move on with Rosabella. But yeah, if you guys are new to my Ever After High retelling series, the point of this series is to retell Ever After High from start to end and basically cover everything from start to end, even stuff that's in the books, and kind of just analyze the plot and put everything together for you guys. Basically, we're just picking up where episode 2 of my Ever After High retelling series left off. So in episode 2, we covered the book The Unfairest of Them All, which is the second main Shannon Hale book, and in that video we kind of like talked about what happened in that book, but the main notable thing that we talked about in that video that is going to continue into this video is the Jabberwock. So if you remember, in The Unfairest of Them All, a big plot point was that Madeline Hatter had accidentally set the Jabberwock free, and basically The Unfairest of Them All kind of ended with like a spooky epilogue where it kind of like talked about like how the Jabberwocky was supposed to go off and sleep for like, I don't know, like a very long time before it kind of like rose up again, but it actually did not fall asleep, which means the Jabberwocky is kind of looming out there in the world of Ever After High, and it's still kind of like a threat. So that leaves us at the beginning of A Wonderlandiful World. So A Wonderlandiful World kind of basically starts off with two prospects. The first prospect is that all the students are going to be attending this field trip to visit the North Wind. And when I say all the students, I mean all the students from like Apple and Raven's class, specifically the students who are in their like sophomore year or their legacy year, I guess you could say. So basically their previous year, which was their freshman year, they had gone to see the West Wind. This year they're going to see the North Wind, and then they'll go see the other two winds their last 2 years of high school. The other prospect that kind of we get introduced to at the beginning of the book is this Tiara-a-thon. This Tiara-a-thon is kind of like a triathlon, just Ever After High's version of triathlon, and we get to see some of like the students training for that. So that's just the context I wanted to give you guys for what is going to be happening in this book and what we are going to be talking about. So in this book, we learn that Lizzie is roommates with Duchess Swan, and also that she has a door in her room to the Wonderland Grove, which the Wonderland Grove is also kind of like her garden, but she has like this door, and it's a heart-shaped door that only she uses. It's not like a literal thing where she's the only person who can go through the door, but Lizzie is very kind of like closed off, standoffish, and selfish, and she's the only one who wants to go through the door. We also learn that she has like a lot of lingering pressure from her mother. She has not been able to talk to her mother since she escaped Wonderland. And you guys have to remember, I'm pretty sure like they escaped Wonderland before the start of their freshman year. So it's been like over a year since she's talked to her mother last, and you can tell she really misses her mother. And Lizzie kind of has this like magical deck of cards that her mother gave her that she uses to get advice from her mom. Like whenever she needs advice, she'll just pull like a card from the deck. But in my opinion, the advice is not very good. It's all just kind of like crazy Queen of Hearts stuff. And like, for example, one of the cards basically says you should not have friends because friends is 1 R away from fiends, and like you can't trust friends. So basically throughout a lot of like this book, her struggle is that she doesn't want to get too close to anybody. She doesn't want to have friends. She's constantly going around just saying like off with your head and kind of like being mean to people. But a big part of the reason for that is because she's a royal and because she really wants to stick to her destiny of being the next Queen of Hearts, and she doesn't want to appear soft, you know? And she also doesn't want to go against her mother's advice. So in the beginning of the book, we kind of see Lizzie like go to the Wonderland Grove through the door in her room, and Apple's actually looking for her, and Apple comes and finds Lizzie, and Apple's like, hey Lizzie, we need you for something, like come talk to me, like we need to go meet with Headmaster Grimm. And Lizzie's like, okay, I'll meet you back at the castle. And then Lizzie just like goes through her door and doesn't let Apple come through the door, which again shows Lizzie's kind of like selfishness. But then anyway, they go meet with Headmaster Grimm, and basically what is perspiring is Headmaster Grimm wrote a secret play called The Tragedy of Aquilona, which is supposed to be performed on their field trip when they go to see the North Wind, and he's getting like some of the royals to play the characters in it. So like Apple and Daring are in it, and Briar was supposed to be playing Aquilona, but Briar keeps falling asleep. So Apple's like, Lizzie, you need to play Aquilona. And Lizzie's like, what? And then she's like, yeah, because literally the play needs to be performed tomorrow, and you're the only one who can memorize stuff that fast. And Lizzie's like kind of confused. And basically we kind of end up learning that Lizzie kind of just has like this power. And I don't even know if it's a magical power. It's just like she's really good at memorizing stuff. So like, for example, even though she constantly pulls her mom's cards, sometimes like even if she's not pulling her mom's cards for advice, she'll be able to think of them. Like she literally has all her mom's cards memorized. She can memorize stuff really fast. So she basically ends up memorizing the whole script of Aquilona for the field trip. Also, I didn't even show you guys the cover of A Wonderlandiful World, and I think this cover is really interesting because like the two main characters of this book are definitely Cedar and Lizzie. And I think it's very, very interesting that they put Maddie on the cover. Don't get me wrong, you guys will see Maddie does play a huge role in this story, and Cedar is definitely the other main character. There's actually even a part in this story that is like so meta where they talk about how Cedar and Lizzie are the main characters. So I think this is weird. My best guess for why they put Maddie on the cover and not Lizzie is because this book was like the last book that came out before Next Top Villain. And so they were probably designing this like at the same time they were designing the cover for Next Top Villain. And my best guess is because Lizzie is on the cover for Next Top Villain, they didn't also want to put her on this cover. Like they wanted to spread it out, like, you know. But the reason I'm holding this up is because let's talk about what is going on with Cedar, because she is the other main character of this book. So Cedar is competing in the Tiara-thon, and the part of the Tiara-thon that she is competing in is the swimming part. And when Cedar's swimming, basically someone like asked her, like, and I think it was like Sparrow. No, it wasn't Sparrow. I think it was Hopper. Hopper, I believe, it was one of the guys, I think, like asked her like, oh, is it easier for you to swim because you can like float? And she's like, well, I guess I kind of float because, you know, she's made of wood. But at this point in the story, we kind of start to learn about Cedar's struggle, which Cedar's struggle is that she's made of wood, very obviously, but her bigger struggle is that if she were to follow her destiny, she would be able to become a real girl, which she really wants. And she's kind of really struggling because she feels like everything that she feels is fake. Like she talks about how when she tastes something, it's an imagined taste, or when she touches something, it's imagined. And she even talks about like how she thinks her brain is imagined, which I know is confusing, but she's like saying this because she's made of wood, so she's not real. And she really wants to become a real girl, but then at the same time, she's a rebel. She doesn't really want to follow her destiny. Like she doesn't really like any of the other stuff she's supposed to do in her destiny, because if you don't know, Pinocchio is actually supposed to do a lot of bad stuff. So she's having a crisis about that. But anyway, let's get back to the field trip and back to Lizzie playing Aquilona. Oh, the other important part of Lizzie playing Aquilona is that Daring is also in this play. And this is kind of like where we see the start of Daring kind of falling in love with Lizzie. He kind of is starting to be like nice to her, and she's very standoffish to him. But anyway, if you guys have seen my other parts of my Ever After High retelling, or if you have read the books, you will know this, but in Ever After High, the wishing wells are actually used as portals to different parts of Ever After. So they all go in like one wishing well that is supposed to like take them to the Mountain of the North Wind. And they all get there and they're like, there's no North Wind. And Headmaster Grimm is like, actually, unlike the West Wind, which you saw last year, you will not physically be seeing the North Wind. And guess what? We're going to learn about why. We're going to watch my play that I directed. Oh my gosh, guys. The Tragedy of Aquilona. And everybody's like, what? And then they go on to perform this play, and we basically find out through the play that in the play, Daring plays like the previous North Wind, who is Aquilona's father, and when he dies, he's supposed to hand off the position of North Wind to Aquilona, but Aquilona didn't want to be the North Wind, so she ran away. But then like the Wild Winds tried to drag Aquilona back to like the North Mountain, which kind of removed her from her physical form, and she was blown apart. I don't even like, what is I know, what is this plot? But she was basically blown apart. She doesn't have a physical form. And like the lesson of this play that Headmaster Grimm was trying to prove is that you should follow your destiny, otherwise you're gonna get ripped apart by the wind. Because now Aquilona has no physical form. And just as Ainsley commenting on this, because they never address this again in the book, but me commenting on this, is the plot of this play real, or did Headmaster Grimm just make it up? Because, like, while we're getting this play in the book, we're kind of also getting the audience's reaction, and, like, the play is really trying to drill into them, like, it's, you need to follow your destiny, or bad things are gonna happen, and Raven's just sitting there in the audience, and she's just like, is this play about me? And yeah, it's very dramatic. And part of me really thinks that Aquilona did just run away because she didn't want to be the North Wind and nothing really happened to her. And Headmaster Grimm is just making this whole thing up to like scare the rebels. Because that is very in character for her. But then the next thing that happens is they kind of find this baby Bandersnatch. And they start freaking out because there's not supposed to be Bandersnatches on the North Mountain. There are not supposed to be any Bandersnatches in Ever After High. There are only supposed to be Bandersnatches in Wonderland. And this is not Wonderland, it's Ever After. And they go to Baba Yaga, and everybody's freaking out, and then she, like, realizes that it's actually a bear that was transformed into a Bandersnatch. And she's like, that's weird. And then they start freaking out because they're like, oh no, the mom bear / Bandersnatch, because all these bears were transformed into Bandersnatch, they're gonna look for the baby. And then all these bear / Bandersnatches do come looking for that baby, let me tell you. And they start, like, chasing after the students. And, yeah, and so, like, there's two things going on. They're obviously freaked out because these bears / Bandersnatches are trying to get them, but they're also freaked out because what is transforming bears into Bandersnatches? Like, that is not normal. That is not part of, you know, the destiny. That's not part of the plot. So basically, like, Headmaster Grimm, Baba Yaga, Mr. Badwolf, they were, like, the teachers that were there with them. They tell all the students, they're like, just run down the mountain, run away from the Bandersnatches, escape, we'll deal with this, go take the portal back to school. So then basically all the legacy year students, so all the sophomore students are back at the castle. Nobody else is back there with them. There's no staff. Everybody else is still on their field trips or on the North Mountain trying to get rid of these Bandersnatch bears. At this same time, we find out that, guess what? It was the Jabberwocky. Remember how I said at the beginning of the video, the Jabberwocky escaped? Yeah, the Jabberwocky was trying to eat stuff, but you know, the Jabberwocky's from Wonderland, so it didn't really like how bears taste, so it was transforming all these Bandersnatches, or all these bears into Bandersnatches to eat them. But then, when the Wonderland students came to the North Mountain, it realized that there was Wonderlandian creatures in Ever After High. You get where this is going? So it decides to follow the Wonderlandian creatures, aka Lizzie, Maddie, and Kitty. I don't have Kitty's doll. Follow them back to Ever After High. So now all the students are back at Ever After High, unsupervised, and the Jabberwocky is coming for them. So the Jabberwocky gets to Ever After High. We don't, like, we the audience know this, but the students don't really know this yet. And what we see, when they're back at Ever After High, we see Cedar in her room, and she's painting. Cedar loves to paint. This is one of her hobbies. And she's painting, and she accidentally, like, I think she must have been, like, using some sort of knife or something with her paint, because she accidentally, like, cuts herself on her finger with her paint. But it hurts. But she's made of wood. She's never felt pain before. And she's like, that's weird. And her finger kind of starts to feel soft and fleshy. And she's like, and the cut's not healing. She's like, what is going on? And she runs to Apple and Raven's room. She gets there. Raven transforms into a raven, and Apple transforms into a literal apple. And she's like, what is going on? And then they go to the gymnasium. Ashlyn transforms into, like, literal glass slippers. Hunter transforms into a tree. This one is very interesting. Daring transforms into, like, a little beast, which to me, I think this kind of confirms that he was always meant to be the beast, because not spoiler, but the reason all these things were transforming is because the Jabberwock was transforming them into, like, kind of, like, their literal descriptions. Because it was trying to, like, spread Wonderlandiful magic. Like, that's why this book is called A Wonderlandiful World. It was trying to turn Ever After into Wonderland, but it was doing it, like, in a corrupted way, if that makes sense. So it's turning all these things. And like I said just a second ago, I think maybe this confirms that Daring was also meant to be the beast, which actually kind of makes his ship with Lizzie even sadder, because that means, like, even while they were building up the Lizzie and Daring ship, they always knew that he was eventually going to get with Rosabella. Yeah, so, like, all the students are transformed into just, like, things or animals, except for Cedar. Well, she just transforms into a real girl. And then she's also having like a crisis because everybody else is transforming into like other like literal things. And she's like, does this mean I'm actually a real girl? Or is it none of it true? Am I not a real girl? Is this all fake? Because, you know, Apple's not actually meant to be an apple. She's meant to be herself. So am I actually not meant to be a girl? Or am I meant to be a real girl? And she's having a whole identity crisis. Meanwhile, the Wonderlandians, guess what this does to them? It just makes them more sane. Like, it doesn't change them. Somehow, like, I think it starts to kind of like drain some of their wonder. So they become like more sane. But they're like, oh my gosh, we got to do something about the Jabberwocky, because soon enough, the Jabberwocky starts like trying to get them. And then they basically escape through Lizzie's door to the Wonderland Grove. Now, this is kind of like a big deal because previously Lizzie never let anyone else through this door. Oh, also, I forgot to mention, at this point, they literally can't escape like Ever After High because Headmaster Grimm and Baba Yaga put a shield around Ever After to prevent the Jabberwocky from leaving and spreading its magic anywhere else. We also learn that what the Jabberwock wants is it wants the Wonderlandians. It wants the Wonderlandians because if it can like kind of like suck all their magic out, it can kind of like make itself stronger. Like, it needs Wonderlandiful magic to survive, if that makes sense. So, the four of them, Kitty, Maddie, Lizzie, and Cedar, are in the Wonderland Grove, and they are kind of like freaking out. And they are trying to figure out how to defeat the Jabberwock. They tried calling, let me say her full name, Mrs. Her Majesty the White Queen. Yes, that's her full name. They try to call Mrs. Her Majesty the White Queen. She is not picking up. She's like, she can't come to the telephone right now. And she was on one of the other field trips. So she wasn't even with them on their field trip, but they can't get a hold of her. They're like, where is she? I also think it's weird that this is never addressed later, why they couldn't get in contact with her. But they just kind of like say it's because there wasn't good service, which I don't know. They do end up trying to call Headmaster Grimm, and he does pick up. And he does basically say like, just don't worry. We're working on a spell right now. I need to help Baba Yaga. We're working on a spell to get rid of the Jabberwocky. Just stop. And then he just like hangs up on them. And then they're like, what? Because basically when Headmaster Grimm called them, he said, okay, we're working on this spell. But Lizzie points out, actually the spell will not work. The only way to defeat the Jabberwock is with a Vorpal sword. Now, Vorpal swords grow in the tum-tum trees in Wonderland. Guess what? There's no tum-tum trees in Ever After High. And then they're like, what do we do? And Maddie's like, there's this book where you can write to somebody in Wonderland. Like, one time I found this book and I missed Wonderland, so I wrote, and they wrote back about Wonderland. And Lizzie is like, what? And somehow this book ends up appearing. Like, this is just giving, like, Tom Riddle's diary from Harry Potter, except, like, not evil. So they write in this book, like, how do we get a Vorpal sword? Like, what do we do? And the book writes back. I'm also pretty sure that it was the White Rabbit who wrote back, because whoever wrote back to them signed it with a paw print. I think that had to be the White Rabbit. I think it was Bunny's dad. That's my theory about who was writing back in the book to them. But anyway, somebody writes back in the book, this magical book that somehow people can write to from Wonderland. They basically say, okay, so you cannot just like get a Vorpal sword, but what you can do is if you paint a very realistic picture of a tum-tum tree, you can pull the Vorpal sword out of the picture. Like, the picture will become real for a second, and you can get the sword out that way. So you need to paint a very, very realistic picture of the tum-tum tree. And they're like, okay, Cedar, you can paint. You gotta paint a tum-tum tree. And then Cedar's like, I ain't never seen a tum-tum tree before. Like, I don't know what you want me to do. Also, at the same time, the narrator starts going insane. Like, the narrator starts talking, like, complete gibberish. And, Maddie and Kitty can hear this. And then Maddie starts freaking out because she's like, oh my gosh, the narrator can't narrate. If the narrator can't narrate the story, like, the story won't end. We'll all just, like, be stuck like this. Like, the story can't continue if the narrator can't narrate. But because Maddie can hear the narrator, Maddie realizes, you know what? I can become the narrator. She also kind of, like, ends up taking this pledge to, like, be a good narrator, which this pledge actually says certain things. Like, this pledge says you're not supposed to interfere with the story. And, like, by interfere with the story, what that means is not like Maddie can't do anything. Maddie can still act as a character. Maddie can't just do anything as a narrator. Like, she's not supposed to say anything as a narrator that would change the story, if that makes sense. She can, like, still pick up a Vorpal sword and, slice at the Jabberwocky. That's fine, because that's Maddie, the character. But when she's using her words as the narrator, she can't interfere with the story. This is going to be important later. That's why I'm pointing this out. But she takes this pledge. She becomes the narrator for now. They also realize that yeah, they need to get a description of the Tum Tum tree for Cedar. And then they remember there's this book in like the library with a very good description of a Tum Tum tree. And they're like, we need to get this book so that Cedar can use this description to paint a Tum Tum tree. Lizzie and Maddie decide to go find this book. They decide to go back through the heart-shaped door to go get this book from the library. But then Maddie is concerned that if she leaves Wonderland Grove, like, Cedar and Kitty's story won't continue. So Kitty has to narrate what's happening with her and Cedar in Wonderland Grove, and Kitty is not as good at it as Maddie. So Maddie, Lizzie, go get the book. They come back. Kitty is very relieved. She's glad that Maddie can now narrate for all of them because she did not like narrating and she was very bad at it. So they also find out that when Lizzie gets back, the book did not make it because they were like being attacked by like all these little like monster weird corrupted things the Jabberwocky had created. Like, oh, I forgot to mention this. So like when the Jabberwocky turned all the students into objects, it also like made some of the objects like alive, like kind of Beauty and the Beast style, except like in an evil way. Like imagine like the window panes were coming alive, so like random things were chasing after them, like furniture, whatever. Just imagine Beauty and the Beast, but evil. And when I say Beauty and the Beast, I don't mean like the Beast. I mean like the silverware and stuff coming alive, like stuff like that. So they get back, but they lost the book. But remember, Lizzie has very good memorization skills. So because Lizzie had read that passage of the book when her and Maddie went to get it in the library, she recites it perfectly for Cedar. So then Cedar can paint the picture of the Tum Tum tree. They grab the Vorpal sword out of it. And that's very interesting because they like describe it. They're like, it becomes very real for a second. They grab the sword out and then it's just a painting again. Woo! But they get the Vorpal sword and they're like, okay, time to go fight the Jabberwocky. Oh, also I forgot to mention that earlier when the girls, so like the Wonderlandian girls were trying to like escape the Jabberwock, because remember the Jabberwock like wants to kind of like get the Wonderland creatures and kind of like eat them and suck all their magic out. Basically the Mad Hatter had seen this, and because the Mad Hatter is like the only other Wonderlandian person who was there, he decided to distract the Jabberwock so that the Jabberwock would go for him so that the girls could kind of like escape. So they are also trying to rescue the Mad Hatter, because what happens is like after the girls get the Vorpal sword, they go back through Lizzie's door to school and they find the Jabberwock to go and defeat him in the gymnasium, and the Jabberwock has kind of like tied the Mad Hatter to his head to like drain the Mad Hatter's Wonderlandian power out, whatever. And Maddie's like very upset with this, and Maddie's having a very hard time because she's trying to narrate, she's worried about her dad, she's freaking out, but Lizzie has the Vorpal sword and Lizzie is like trying to swing this sword at the Jabberwock. It's not working too well. Like Cedar's also trying to fight. The little like daring beast is also there and he's also trying to help because remember, he still has a crush on Lizzie. He wants to like, even though he's a little beast, because even though he turned into a beast, he didn't turn into like the big beast. He's a little beast, but he's still trying to do his best to help. They're all trying to fight this dragon. Like Kitty is like also trying to fight, like she's trying to do that disappear thing where she goes back and forth, but she also gets very scared and kind of just ends up disappearing for a while. This is so funny. It's not even that gory, but low-key, this fight with the Jabberwock is probably the goriest thing that has happened in Ever After High. And the reason I say this is because it's the only time I can really think of where blood is like actually mentioned by name. And I think it was because like, you know, Cedar, she's a real girl at this point, and she starts to realize, oh no, I'm not wood anymore. I can actually feel pain as this Jabberwock hits. And I forget, it was either like her or Lizzie, one of them got hit, and they're like, oh no, I'm bleeding, like whatever. It was not that bad or anything, but I just thought it was interesting to say. This is an intense fight for Ever After High. But the Jabberwock, unfortunately, ends up like getting the sword. And they're like, no. Oh, also at this point, they found out that the Vorpal sword, when you slice it, it will create a portal to Wonderland. And Lizzie's already kind of like dreaming. She's like, oh my gosh, I could just like go through the portal back to Wonderland, but no, I need to defeat the Jabberwock. But when the Jabberwock then gets the sword, then they're kind of like trying to convince the Jabberwock. They're like, oh, maybe, you know, you should just make a portal and go back to Wonderland. And the Jabberwock's like, actually, no, I do not want to use the Vorpal sword to go back to Wonderland. I want to stay here. I want to drain the wonder from you guys, because if I go back to Wonderland, you know what? The Queen of Hearts rules there. I can rule here. Like, I can make everything my way. I don't want to go back to Wonderland because then I have to listen to the other Wonderlandians. No, I just want to make this my Wonderland. And they're like, oh, no. And, like, because the Vorpal sword has kind of, like, started creating these portals, they are, like, we're hoping that somehow they would be able to push the Jabberwock through one of these portals, or convince the Jabberwock to go through one of these portals that the Vorpal sword, like, would create when you slice it. But it seems hopeless at this point. And then Maddie gets an idea. She decides, you know what? For the greater good, I gotta break my pledge I took as a narrator. I gotta narrate the Jabberwock into the portal. So what Maddie does is she starts narrating, oh, the Jabberwock got sucked into the portal, oh, the Jabberwock got pushed into the portal, to force it, and the Jabberwock's like, no, stop saying that, that's not happening, blah, blah, blah. And then Maddie actually enlists us, the audience, to chant at our book, like, that the Jabberwock is going to be going into the portal, you know, she gets the audience to be like, go to the portal. So the Jabberwock does end up going into the portal because the narrator interfered with the story. Then what happens is, right after this, everybody starts transforming back into themselves, and now that kind of, like, Lizzie has gone through some character development where she, like, fought the Jabberwock with her friends, she kind of starts to say, you know what, I don't think having friends is so bad, I actually like you guys, and they kind of start to have a sweet moment, and then Cedar's like, you know what, I'll help you rebuild the Wonderland Grove. Oh, because I also forgot, like, when they were when they were going back to fight the Jabberwock, like, Wonderland Grove did end up kind of getting some damage to it. Some of the plants may have died. They may have gotten hit by all this chaos. And then at the same time, Headmaster Grimm gets back as everybody's transforming back, and he's like, aha, it was our spell. You know, our spell actually, stopped the Jabberwock. And Maddie's just there like, do I mean nothing? No, she didn't say that. But Maddie was just like, what? And then what happens is, because, like, the big portal that the Jabberwock had gone through, like, it had closed, but there was still kind of, like, a sliver of where the portal had been, and it kind of starts to fizz, and this kind of, like, fizzing, like, magical dust goes onto everybody, because at this point, like, literally everybody's in the gymnasium, and it makes everybody fall asleep, and when they wake up, they forget, like, everything that happened that day. So nobody remembers the Jabberwock or anything. And part of me wonders, like, why this happened. Like, was it just a side effect of the portal, or was it, like, when the real narrator came back, the narrator did this to get everybody to forget about the Jabberwock, because that wasn't supposed to happen. Also to make everybody forget about the fact that to defeat the Jabberwock, Maddie had to interfere with the story. And that also makes me wonder, like, is the Jabberwock that big of a threat? Because, like, the Jabberwock could literally interfere with what the narrator was saying. Like, when the Jabberwock had been there previously, it, like, literally made the original narrator unable to, like, speak English. Like, the original narrator, the reason Maddie had to start narrating is because the original narrators just, like, started speaking gibberish. Like, I don't even know if they were speaking British. I think they were just, like, speaking literal nonsense. Like, that's the entire reason Maddie had to start narrating. So maybe, like, the Jabberwock was just, like, such an anomaly, they decided to erase it from everybody's memory. I don't know, but whatever. We end up getting the Tiara-thon, and it's weird because during the Tiara-thon, obviously Cedar forgot about the previous events of, like, the previous day of her, like, you know, becoming a real girl because of the Jabberwock. Like, she had forgotten about that, but she also starts to get, like, some sort of a sense that maybe she had a very vivid dream that she was a real girl, because when she's, like, swimming in the Tiara-thon, she starts thinking about, like, hey, somehow I feel like I remember being human and this is weird, and she starts having, like, a little crisis again. But then Raven ends up talking to her, and Raven's like, you know what, I feel like you'll probably be able to become a real girl someday anyway, like, you know, just figure it out, and, like, being what isn't so bad. And, like, Raven kind of comforts her, and basically Cedar somehow accepts, like, she's like, you know what, I am going to do my own destiny, I'm going to do what I want. Hopefully I know in my heart of heart that I will become a real girl, and that is still my destiny either way, even if I don't do the full Pinocchio story. So that's kind of, like, Cedar's resolution. Like, Lizzie's resolution is still, like, a little sad, because unfortunately she did end up losing her memory for that day, so she basically, like, doesn't really remember all her character development, but she does start to open up a little bit, like again, even though everybody, like, kind of forgot the previous day, they were still kind of left with, like, some flashes of memory, some feelings, like how Cedar kind of remembers being a real girl, but she doesn't know when that happened. So Lizzie kind of remembers being nicer to her friends, and so she starts to just be a little nicer to them. The other thing that happens is Maddie's the only one who can remember. No shock. This girl knows everything. She remembers, and then the narrator ends up bringing the chief chronicler, who's, like, in charge of the narrators, to talk to Maddie. And at first, like, I thought Maddie was gonna get in trouble. The audience thinks Maddie's gonna get in trouble for interfering, but actually they award her with a golden glyph, and this golden glyph is kind of like an imaginary medal, because, you know, the narrators are see-through, like, you can't see them. So it's like an imaginary medal. It's not really imaginary, it's real, but you just can't see it because you can't see it. The narrators are disembodied. It's a disembodied medal that Maddie gets for her bravery as a narrator, because I guess somehow, because she saved, like, the story would have literally ended if she didn't become the narrator and take over from the previous narrator. I guess, like, it gave her, like, credence, I don't know. Something, she was somehow okay with breaking the rules. They were proud of her, so she got a medal for being a good narrator. So that is basically where A Wonderlandiful World ends. But I think it's actually really good to start the next thing that we're going to talk about, which the next thing we're going to talk about is Next Top Villain, because Next Top Villain kind of like directly continues Lizzie's story arc. Yes, Next Top Villain, like the main character of it is Duchess, but Lizzie is Duchess's roommate, so she gets featured a lot, even though it's not like from her POV. Like it's from Duchess's POV, but Lizzie, we still see Lizzie struggle. We still see like Lizzie trying to follow her mom's advice. Anyway, okay, so the premise of Next Top Villain is that I believe it's probably at the beginning of the second quarter in Ever After High, because they all get new course schedules, and we know it's after Legacy Day. Now, some people might assume that it's at the start of the second semester, like the spring semester, but I don't think that's true, because there's some more things that like happen before the spring. So I think it's at the start of like a second quarter, which if you don't know, some schools go by 4 quarters. So they have like a quarter that's like, I don't know, like maybe like September, October, like a quarter that starts like in late October and then goes to like kind of like winter. So anyway, I don't know. My hypothesis is their school year goes by quarters, and this is the start of the second quarter because it takes place like after Legacy Day and everything. Anyway, they all get new class schedules, and Duchess is freaking out because she gets put in general villainy. So the people who are in general villainy are Faybelle, Raven, like Lizzie, because everybody kind of forgets this, but the Queen Hearts is technically a villain, so it makes sense. Sparrow, because even though Sparrow is kind of like a good guy, like he's supposed to be Robin Hood, Robin Hood kind of has like evilish tendencies because he does steal, so Sparrow needs to know how to be mischievous, so he's in general villainy. And then, I feel like there's one more person. Oh, I think I said Faybelle, and then there's also Gingerbread House, because remember, her mom is the Candy Witch, and the Candy Witch is evil. Anyway, like, Mr. Badwolf comes in the first day of general villainy, and he's, like, talking about how, like, oh my gosh, this class is kind of, like the worst class of villains yet, because, like, Raven is supposed to be the evil. She doesn't even want to be a villain. Honestly, Faybelle's kind of the best one because she does actually want to be evil, but she's still kind of, like, not super evil. Like, she wants to be evil, but she's not that evil. Duchess doesn't even want to be a villain, and also Duchess is trying to transfer out of the class. She's like, I am supposed to be the Swan Princess. I'm supposed to be Swan Lake. Like, what am I doing here? And Mr. Badwolf was like, no, you have to stay in this class. And she's like, why? Like, she doesn't understand. And then Lizzie, this is also where we kind of get more of Lizzie's character development. Lizzie does act very harshly. Like, she tries to, like, put on this persona of being evil, but Lizzie's not actually good at being evil, and she doesn't actually tend to actually do evil acts. Like, she acts evil, like, she'll be like, oh, with your head. Will she actually cut off somebody's head? No. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? And then Raven just doesn't want to be there, and then Sparrowhood just kind of doesn't care. But in general villainy, they get their assignment, and their assignment for the first week is they have to do, like, a really evil thing by Friday, and basically whoever does the evilest deed, like the worst thing by Friday, gets an A, and everybody else gets an FF, which is a fairy fail. Now, Duchess does not want to be evil, but is Duchess motivated by her grades? Yes. So Duchess is like, oh my gosh, I gotta figure out how to do something very evil by Friday because I cannot, my GPA, I gotta keep my straight A's. I cannot let my GPA drop. And then anyway, a little bit later, like Duchess kind of like is in her swan form, and she's kind of like meandering around the pond as a swan, and when she's in her swan form, she kind of just looks like a regular swan, but when she's in her swan form, she overhears Headmaster Grimm and Mr. Badwolf talking, and basically Headmaster Grimm is telling like the big bad wolf about how he's kind of hoping that Duchess Swan has a black swan side to her, and that perhaps if Raven cannot fulfill her evil destiny, Duchess can take it over. And then Duchess is kind of like having a conundrum once she hears this, because she's like, I do not want to be a rebel. I do not want to follow destiny other than my own. And then she's like, wait, would I really be a rebel if I'm following like Raven's destiny, if Headmaster Grimm needs that? And she's like having a whole thing. She's like, I don't really want to be a rebel, but actually it would be kind of like good. I don't know. And she's like freaking out. The other thing I want to mention about this scene before we like continue with the plot is I think it's very interesting how Headmaster Grimm calls Duchess a black swan, because at first glance you may just imply like, oh, she has a black swan side. That's what Headmaster Grimm said. Having a black swan side just means that like she has an evil side to her, or you could imply that, oh, maybe actually she's not supposed to be Odette, she's supposed to be Odile from Swan Lake, who is the black swan and who's like the evil one. But I think there's also like another take on it, and my take that I had when I kind of like analyze this is that perhaps when Headmaster Grimm says black swan, that means that kind of like Duchess has the ability to kind of like become someone else. And what I mean by that is in Swan Lake, the black swan whose name is Odile, she transforms herself to kind of like look like Odette to the prince. And part of me wonders, perhaps Headmaster Grimm still wants Duchess to be, you know, Odette from Swan Lake, but perhaps he also wants her to be the evil queen. I don't know if this is true. That was just like a little theory I had, that perhaps when he said she has a black swan side, that means like he thinks she has the ability to kind of like transform into an eviler side and make herself like kind of become the evil queen. I don't even know, guys. But now that I'm thinking about it, would it even really be possible for Duchess to be the evil queen? Because she's not a witch like Raven is. But I don't know, maybe she can learn witchcraft. I guess maybe that's something you could learn. I don't know. Maybe somehow Baba Yaga could like give her witch powers. I don't even know. Oh, and the other reason Duchess is kind of like a little bit on board with the idea of actually fulfilling Raven's destiny and kind of like doing more villain classes instead of her own is that actually part of what Headmaster Grimm says is he thinks Duchess will be tempted to kind of the path of being a villain, because if Duchess likes general villainy and she takes the higher level villain classes, she will actually learn magic. So that's, I guess they did kind of prove that she can learn magic. She will learn magic, and she will kind of learn that there's like a cure to her destiny, because I know Barbie Swan Lake is very optimistic. Like Barbie Swan Lake has an ending, but in most kind of like swan maiden fairy tales, which is kind of like what Duchess's fairy tale is based on, a lot of the times the maiden just ends up staying a swan or dying a swan. And so Duchess's destiny, it's confirmed like in Next Top Villain that her destiny is just to stay a swan. Like she would have to be the swan for like the rest of her life after her destiny is fulfilled. And Headmaster Grimm is talking about how like, oh, maybe if, you know, Duchess learns evil magic, then she won't have to stay a swan because she'll learn how to transform herself back into a human. And so that kind of starts to tempt Duchess as well, because yes, Headmaster Grimm was correct. Being able to kind of like transform herself into a human and not have to stay a swan for the rest of her life is a very tempting premise, because does she really want to stay a swan for the rest of her life? No. I've also talked about this in my Ever After High theories before, that Duchess's destiny in general is just very sad, because like her true love, her prince, is supposed to die and then she's supposed to be stuck a swan. So did Duchess really ever want to follow her princess destiny? No, because unlike all the other princesses, she does not have a happily ever after. So yeah, Duchess didn't really want to follow her destiny to begin with anyway, but she didn't necessarily want to be a villain, but it is tempting to her. Anyway, moving on. Basically, like, Blondie gets a hold of the fact that Mr. Badwolf kind of like said his class was a disappointment, which, let's just talk about the fact that Mr. Badwolf said his class was a disappointment for a second. Bro, you married Little Red Riding Hood. And also Raven is literally like sitting in his class when he says this, and Raven knows he's married to Little Red Riding Hood. And I'm also pretty sure, because like in the unfairest of them all, like Little Red found out that Raven did know that her and Mr. Badwolf were married. So I'm pretty sure Mr. Badwolf also knows that Raven knows, and he's saying this to them in the class, that he's like, oh, you guys are disappointments, like Raven doesn't want to follow her destiny. And I'm like, bruh. Hypocrite. Anyway, no, he obviously has to play the part because he doesn't want to get in trouble with Headmaster Grimm, but I just think it's so funny that he like says all this stuff to them when he like he's like disappointed in Raven, and I'm like, do you know who you are? But yeah, like Blondie gets wind of this, that like Mr. Badwolf was calling his class like disappointing, and also the fact that he gave them like this big assignment that's due Friday to see who can do the evilest act. And Blondie makes it into this thing where she's like, who's gonna be the next top villain? And then Lizzie is like annoyed. Lizzie is like, oh my gosh, stop, off with your head. And then anyway, but they go to their next class, which is like Princessology, and Raven, Lizzie, and Duchess are also in Princessology. So those three students are in both general villainy and Princessology. So then Blondie starts reporting on this, because in Princessology they get a big assignment, which is like they have to do this horse obstacle course on Friday, and Blondie's like, oh my gosh, Raven Queen, Lizzie, and Duchess have two big assignments due by Friday. How will they ever do that? And I'm like, Blondie, why is this like on the school gossip page? But anyway, during their class, they're like learning how to ride these horses, whatever. The horses end up getting spooked, and they get spooked by Sparrowhood's music, because guess what? Sparrowhood does not live in the dorms. He's rebellious, so he lives in a treehouse in the woods. And then Mrs. Her Majesty, the White Queen, tells Duchess to go tell Sparrow to shut up. She doesn't say shut up. She would never say that, but she tells like Duchess, go tell who's ever making that sound to quiet down. And Duchess knows it's Sparrow, and she goes to Sparrow's house, and Sparrow's like, hey, I want to make a deal. He actually brought up this deal before, but Duchess said she wasn't interested in it before, but he's trying to get her to do this deal. Now, what is the deal? The deal is that Sparrow helps Duchess with whatever plan she's gonna do for her big villainy plan, and he doesn't care. She can get the A. Like, she can do her plan, she can get the A. All he wants is that whoever wins the challenge gets an A, but they also get treasure from Mr. Badwolf's treasure chest, and he's like, I just want riches, you know me? He's like, my motto is steal and give to myself, because you know how, like, Robin Hood's motto, his dad was steal from the rich and give to the poor? No. Sparrow Hood, his motto is steal and give to myself. So he's like, I'll give you an idea, and you just, like, have to give me the prize that you get. And she's like, fine. She's like, I don't really want to do this. But then, like, Sparrow Hood starts, like, giving her this advice, and he's like, you know, you could just, like, ruin everybody else's projects. And then Duchess actually, like, said yes, so she's like, fine, I'll do this, you can have my prize, whatever. And previously, actually, again, when Duchess had been transformed into a swan, she overheard what Ginger was gonna do for her evil assignment. Now, so, like, Ginger is supposed to be the Candy Witch, but Ginger does not want to be evil. So Ginger decides to do something that's just slightly evil. What does Ginger decide to do? She makes these cinnamon trolls for everybody, which are basically like cinnamon rolls, and she just decides to put a little bit of cinnamon powder, like, on the top instead of the powdered sugar, so that everybody would get a little sleepy before the first class, because isn't that so evil? So what happens? Duchess, you know, swaps out the Sandman powder. I think she swaps out for sugar. So then basically, like, Ginger thinks she's putting the Sandman powder to make people sleepy on her rolls, and then Ginger, like, brings the rolls to the cafeteria, and then she gets Mr. Badwolf, and she goes, Mr. Badwolf, look what's gonna happen when everybody eats my rolls. And then nothing happens, and then Mr. Badwolf is like, you get a fairy tale, and then Ginger's like, no! So Ginger, she's out, and then Blondie's reporting on this, and Blondie's like, Ginger is out! And also, this is an important factor. Previously, Blondie had already said that Sparrow was out because Sparrow's a slacker, and he just wasn't gonna do anything. Like, she just assumed that. Anyway, so we already have 2 of the 6 out. So who's gonna be the next top villain? So then, you know, Duchess is doing her spying again, and she is spying on Faybelle. And Faybelle says, I am actually going to also put, like, a secret spell and something. She decides to put, like, this, like, spell powder in Lizzie's hedgehog's kibble to turn them into hogs. And then Faybelle does this, but the hedgehogs are napping, so before the hedgehogs wake up for their, like, snack, she's gonna go get Mr. Badwolf so that he can see her evilness. But in the meantime, somehow, like, Duchess, in her swan form, like, scrapes all this magical powder out so the hedgehogs can't eat it, and then so when Mr. Badwolf comes back, he's like, Faybelle, you failed. Like, what is this? Your thing didn't even work. And he's, like, so disappointed. So then now the people who are left are Lizzie, Raven, and Duchess. And Duchess is kind of like, hey, Lizzie, what are you gonna do? And Duchess is having a hard time because she actually, like, doesn't want to hurt Lizzie, because even though, like, her and Lizzie aren't super close, which is, again, another thing with Lizzie's character development, because she's very standoffish, but, you know, you're always gonna have, like, I would hope that you kind of, like, you know, care for your roommate a little. So Duchess kind of, like, doesn't want to do anything to hurt Lizzie too bad, but she finds out that Lizzie doesn't even really care about the assignment. Lizzie is just really annoyed with Blondie, and Blondie's reporting on this, and Blondie constantly getting in her face and being like, hey, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna be the next top villain? And she's like, get away, Blondie. Because at one point, Blondie even, like, storms into their bedroom, and she's like, hey, what are you guys doing? And they're like, get out of our bedroom, Blondie. But anyway, basically, Duchess finds out that what Lizzie is going to be doing is Lizzie is going to take her, like, magical cards that she had from her mom, and I guess they can, like, do stuff. Like, if she throws them at a person, it'll build, like, a house around them. So, like, basically what Lizzie wants to do is throw her magical cards at Blondie, and so they'll, like, lock her in, like, a house of cards, I guess. I don't even know. But once, like, Lizzie goes to sleep, Duchess decides that she's going to take Lizzie's cards and swap them for a deck of normal cards. So she takes Lizzie's cards and she goes into the common room to get a normal deck of cards and swap them out. But when she's in the common room, she sees Daring. Now, I haven't mentioned this too much because I've been really trying to get the plot in of this book, but throughout this book, Daring has constantly been trying to flirt with Lizzie. Like, we get the idea that all the girls at Ever After High, including Duchess has a crush on Daring, are obsessed with Daring. So all the girls, including Duchess, are obsessed with Daring. They're always trying to flirt with him. He literally has a list on his door that people can sign up to go on walks with him. And he starts telling Duchess, he's like, hey, Lizzie's your roommate, right? Like, let her know, like, if she wants to go on a walk, I'll bump her to the top of the list. Like, I don't care. And Duchess is like, okay, because she literally has a crush on Daring, and she's like, bro, you only, like, she's, like, really annoyed because he keeps trying to get with Lizzie, and Lizzie just, like, keeps, like, ignoring it. And not even ignoring it, we'll find out later when we get to, like, the webisode about Lizzie's first date with Daring, that it's just kind of like she doesn't understand, like, how to react to that, or kind of, like, what to do, or, like, I think it may even be that she doesn't even really understand that Daring is flirting, and she also is just very scared to, like, open up and be vulnerable, and she just, like, keeps her evil whatever persona up. But Daring does see, like, Duchess grab the deck of cards. This is important for later. So Duchess grabs the deck of cards and takes them back and puts the deck of cards in Lizzie's deck, and then puts Lizzie's deck in her drawer. And she's just like, okay, I don't want my friend to know that I double crossed her. So even though, like, Lizzie would probably find out, because at the end of the week they all have to say what their evil deed was to, like, Mr. Badwolf, but she's like, I'm just going to, you know, do that and then put her cards in her drawer so she'll find her cards later and maybe think she misplaced them herself. But then anyway, the next day they go to the cafeteria, and Lizzie and Mr. Badwolf was also there. And Lizzie's like, okay, I'm gonna do my evil thing now, Mr. Badwolf. And she goes up to Blondie and she throws the deck of cards at her. Because if it was the magical deck of cards from her mom, they would have formed like a thing around Blondie to trap her. But no, she just threw a normal deck of cards at Blondie, and everybody's like, what? And then Mr. Badwolf is like, you fail. And then we find out what Raven's evil thing was. Also, I should mention this was kind of like the last day for their challenge. So the night before, like, kind of like Lizzie had been trying to spy on Raven to see what Raven was gonna do, because she wasn't sure if Raven was gonna try anything. But basically, she goes up to Raven's window as a swan, and then Raven's like, you know, I can tell it's you. She's like, you know, I can tell it's you, right? And she's like, look, like, I can tell that you're trying to listen to me and find out what my evil plan was. And then, like, Duchess is kind of just like, okay, and then she just like flies away as a swan. But, like, Raven could tell that Duchess, like, what Duchess was doing, and the fact that Duchess was trying to spy on her to ruin her presentation. Like, Raven could tell, like, everybody else's, not presentations, oh my gosh, like, their evil acts. Raven could tell that everybody else's, like, evil acts had been ruined so far, and she kind of caught the hint that it was Duchess. And when she saw, like, a swan, you know, usually, like, Apple's birds sit outside their window, but all of a sudden Raven sees a swan sitting outside the window looking at her. She's like, yeah, that's Duchess. Duchess wants to know what I'm gonna do. But Raven doesn't actually really want to do anything. So basically, back to the next day. So back to the cafeteria after kind of, like, Lizzie's failed attempt at being evil. Raven decides she's gonna have a failed attempt at being evil. So she gets up on the table and she pretends like she's gonna cast an evil spell, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, what's she's gonna do? And then she tries to cast a spell. And a swan appears on the table. And she's like, oh, drat! Duchess ruined my spell! And it's very, very clear, and I think it's even clear to Mr. Badwolf, that Raven never wanted to do anything evil. She doesn't really care, so then she just wanted to help Duchess win, so she just made it look like Duchess messed with her spell. But I don't even think that's possible. Like, how do you mess with somebody's spell like that? Like, I don't even know. So anyway, Duchess is like, okay, I'm gonna win, right? But, like, Mr. Badwolf still hasn't announced the winner. So they go to Princessology. And remember, in Princessology, this was the day of their big horse assignment where they have to go through, like, an obstacle course. Duchess does this and she's fine. The thing is, Lizzie is not good at riding horses. Lizzie is very, very nervous about this. And so Lizzie's riding her horse, and right when Lizzie starts riding her horse, guess what? Sparrowhood starts playing his stupid music again. And Sparrowhood starts, like, you know, doing his music and whatever. And Duchess is like, oh no, he wasn't supposed to do anything evil. He said he was just gonna, like, help me and not do anything. What? And then, so yeah, he's playing his music, and it makes Lizzie's horse go crazy, and Lizzie's horse, like, almost, like, kind of, like, her horse was supposed to go over a bridge, but it almost, like, kind of, like, threw her over the ledge. And then what ends up happening is Daring is also there, and Daring wants to try to save Lizzie, but he's too far to get to, like, from Lizzie to get to her to save her when, like, her horse throws her and, like, almost, like, drops her in this ravine. So what Duchess does is Duchess turns into a swan, flies, and grabs Lizzie and saves them. So yes, Duchess saved Lizzie. Yay for kind of, like, friendship character development, I guess, because then Lizzie's, like, thankful that Duchess saved her. Adds to Lizzie's character development a little bit, whatever. Duchess is also kind of like, yeah, I guess I'm not fully evil because I did want to save Lizzie. And also, I should say before this, Lizzie was really mad at Duchess because she realized that Duchess swapped her cards. Oh my gosh, I forgot to say this. So after Lizzie throws her cards, she realizes that they were not her cards, and she realizes that somebody must have double-crossed her. And remember how Daring had seen Duchess switch the cards? Yeah. Daring tells Lizzie it's Duchess, and that makes it obvious that Duchess has been kind of, like, the one sabotaging people's projects. And then Lizzie also gets very mad at Duchess. But anyway, previously, before Duchess saved Lizzie, Lizzie had been very upset with Duchess, but after Duchess saved Lizzie, Lizzie starts to forgive Duchess a little bit. But Mr. Badwolf is like, okay, Duchess, you cannot win. that was too nice. And he basically awards Sparrowhood with winning because Sparrowhood did two things. He double-crossed Duchess, which was very evil, I guess. And then he also ruined the Princessology exam, which was also evil. So Sparrowhood wins. Duchess is upset about her GPA, whatever. And then the book ends on an ominous note. Duchess is combing through her hair because she had just transformed into a swan. And they kind of say, like usually after Duchess transforms into a swan, when she like goes like this with her hair, like a feather will come out. And so Duchess goes like this to her hair, and normally white feathers come out, but a black feather came out. And I think this is very interesting because later on in the series, when we see Duchess as a swan, she's a black swan, and we see her as a black swan, and this is in True Hearts Day. Now, True Hearts Day takes place like in February, so that's kind of like the start of the spring semester. And I think this is also why the timeline is important, because like this whole like story arc with Next Top Villain probably takes place either late October or November. Like it takes place sometime in the fall. Actually, I think it would probably take place late October. I'm trying to think when their second quarter would start. It either takes place late October or early November. So somehow between this thing, I was going to say this episode, it's not an episode. Sometime between Next Top Villain and True Hearts Day, Duchess fully transforms into a black swan, which is interesting because at the end of the book, she did still kind of learn that she should be nice and like care for Lily. Oh my gosh, she should care for Lizzie. Like she can still be nice sometimes, but it also kind of shows that she is starting to embrace the dark side. Also in True Hearts Day, she kind of is ganged up with Sparrow, which is very interesting because previously Sparrow had double crossed her. So that makes me wonder if there's something that happened that she ended up like kind of forgiving him or working with him again, or if it's kind of like a toxic situation where she just keeps going back to ask him for help because he's the only one that will help her. Like, I don't know. Another thing, when I was preparing for this video, I was kind of like reviewing this book, which this is A Wonderlandiful World, and I think this is very interesting, and I marked it because this is something that happens in the first chapter of this book, which remember, this book takes place before Next Top Villain. But there is also a scene where Duchess is brushing her hair. She pulls a feather out of her hair and she says, and it wasn't even white. Not really. It was painted like with some kind of, and then she gets cut off. What was it painted with? That makes me wonder if her hair, or not her hair, her feathers were already starting to turn black at the beginning of this book before Next Top Villain even happened. But we don't know if it was actually, like, maybe she was going to say with some type of black paint. Like, we don't even know what was sus about the feather that Duchess pulled out because Lizzie cut her off. But I want to say, I think that's interesting, and I think it's really interesting when you read the books and watch the show and put them all together. There's, like, a lot of little breadcrumbs like that really, like, tie everything together nicely, and that's actually part of the reason why I wanted to do the Ever After High retelling series, to tie everything together. But anyway, let's talk about the webisodes I wanted to cover. So the most important webisode to cover in this video is Lizzie Hart's fairy tale first date. So in this first date, a lot of you know the premise. Basically, Daring, Sparrow, and Hopper are in the coffee shop, which I think I forget what it's called. Anyway, they're in the coffee shop, and Sparrow's like, basically, you need to ask out I dare you to ask out the next girl who walks through the door. And Daring's like, easy, all the girls that Ever After High like me. He forgets there's one girl he's literally tried to get with before, and she doesn't even care. Lizzie walks to the door, and Daring's like, no, I got this. I can get her. And he starts trying to flirt with her, and basically throughout the whole episode, we see Daring trying to do different things to get Lizzie's, like, approval, and it basically ends on kind of like a sweet note where Lizzie's like, yeah, I did kind of have fun, like, doing this stuff with you. I'm just nervous because I've never been on a date before. And Daring's like, well, that kind of, like, was a date. And she's like, I guess I liked it. I didn't know it was, like, this easy, but I'm not really ready to open up about this or anything. Which I think this episode does probably take place after, like, Next Top Villain and everything else that's happened, because she has kind of started to open up to Daring and just, like, open up in general a little bit. And I think, like, if this just happened with no character development, it would be kind of unexpected. It would be like all of a sudden, like, she kind of has this soft side to her, even though we do know, if you have read these books, that she's kind of had this soft side to her all along. It's just been very deeply hidden. And I think the reason she was comfortable saying this to Daring is because of the character development that happened in the books where she slowly started to open up. But she's finally comfortable enough, and when her and Daring are alone, she is like, yes, I did like this, but let's just not tell anyone about this. So Daring very chivalrously agrees. So he loses his bet, and he has to, I don't know, I forget, he has to do, like, Sparrow's dirty laundry or something. And he doesn't want to do Sparrow's dirty laundry, but he doesn't want to tell Lizzie's secret that they went out on a little date. So he keeps that secret for Lizzie, and that's so sweet. And like, my biggest thing is this doesn't go anywhere. And my other thing with this is that in Way to Wonderland, like, we see him transform into the Beast, which makes me, or not Way to Wonderland, in A Wonderlandiful World, he transforms to that little beast, which makes it seem like his destiny was always to be the Beast. So it just is so sad. Like, it seems like him and Lizzie were like destined to fail, but I wish we got like more completion to their story arc. Whatever. Maybe I'll just make it up at some point, since I guess this is my retelling series. The other episode I just want to touch on is kind of like further down the timeline, but I just want to touch on it because I think it's interesting. So the next episode I want to touch upon, even though it's like farther down the timeline, is Lizzie Shuffles the Deck. Now, again, this episode takes place a little farther in the future, but the reason I want to point this out here is because in this episode, we're just talking about Lizzie's character development. Lizzie Shuffles the Deck is the episode where we kind of finally see Lizzie kind of like give up this persona of trying to be like her mom, trying to be very harsh, trying to be very standoffish, and that's the first time where we kind of see her become like her sweet self that we eventually see in Way to Wonderland. So I just want to point out that episode, Lizzie Shuffles the Deck, is kind of the culmination of all this kind of like internal self-growth that has been happening. And in that webisode, like, Briar finally talks to Lizzie and she's like, Lizzie, why are you like this? Why are you always mean to us? And Lizzie's like, well, I'm just trying to be like my mom because I want to follow my destiny. And then Briar's like, you know, you don't have to be exactly like your mom to follow your destiny. And then Lizzie finally starts to be nicer. So that's kind of like the completion of Lizzie's story arc. Again, that episode I think does actually take place like after True Hearts Day, but we're gonna cover True Hearts Day not in next part. We're gonna cover True Hearts Day eventually. I think we might have like 1 or 2 more parts before that because we have some other books that we need to cover that take place before True Hearts Day. Oh my god. But yeah, that's basically like Lizzie's character development for this video. But before we end this video, I do want to touch on a little theory that I have about something that transpired in A Wonderlandiful World. So, one thing about Darling's story that has always bothered me is the fact that we have no idea how she went in between Wonderland and Ever After. And what I mean by that is, like, in Spring Unsprung, in Way to Wonderland, we never see how she, as the White Knight, transported herself in between Wonderland and Ever After High. And I have heard some people theorize that it was like some sort of magic mirror, maybe it was the wishing well, we don't know. But when I reread this book, A Wonderlandiful World, I realized that there's actually another way to get to Wonderland, the Vorpal Sword. And part of me wonders if she has access to some sort of Vorpal Sword, and perhaps she can get into Wonderland. And I have also had another theory that perhaps she was knighted as the White Knight by Mrs. Her Majesty, the White Queen, because typically a queen knights a knight, and Darling is the knight to the White Queen. She's the White Knight. So I have like a secret theory that like, that secretly the White Queen is a little more feminist than she seems, because like, if you just read the books, if you just watch the show, actually not if you watch the show, because the White Queen is actually not in the show at all. Like, we see her in the background, but do we ever see her talk? No. But Mrs. Her Majesty, the White Queen, like, acts very conservatively. She's very concerned about like traditional princess roles. She wants the girls to act a certain way, and she reinforces these like gender stereotypes, right? But part of me wonders if she actually secretly doesn't like that. Like, she's kind of like Mr. Badwolf, where she actually doesn't really like her role. And perhaps she knighted Darling as the White Knight, and perhaps gave Darling this Vorpal Sword, which allowed her to transport herself between Wonderland and Ever After. The other weird thing is, remember how earlier I said that the girls could get a hold of Headmaster Grimm, but they couldn't get a hold of the White Queen? Part of me wonders if, like, maybe the White Queen was somewhere, and maybe also Darling was somewhere, because Darling is actually not really mentioned in this book, when she was mentioned in the previous 2 Shan Hale books. I know in the show, Darling was not, like, in the show yet, but, like, there's actually not just 2, actually there's 3 Shan Hale books before this, because there's also kind of, like, there's also the book which is called Once Upon a Time, which actually takes place before the first day of school at Ever After High, and has, like, a bunch of short stories about the different characters, and there's actually a whole short story about Darling Charming. But then Darling is also in the Storybook of Legends and The Unfairest of Them All, but she's not, forgive me if I'm wrong, I don't think she's mentioned in this book at all. And part of me wonders if maybe the White Queen and Darling were somewhere, because they also couldn't get a hold of the White Queen. Maybe they were in Wonderland. Maybe they used the Vorpal Sword to get there. And I'm not saying, I don't think they went to Wonderland because of the Jabberwocky. I think maybe they were already doing something else in Wonderland, perhaps. Or perhaps there is like another secret plot that we're never gonna find out about because Ever After High was canceled, where maybe like originally they did plan for us to kind of like find out in the future, like there was some secret mission like Darling and the White Queen had to go on. Or maybe they did hear about the Jabberwock and they were trying to find some solution to help it. I don't know. Or you know what else? When the Jabberwock got transported into Wonderland, we never hear about it again, but we do know they eventually do go back to Wonderland, way to Wonderland, and the Jabberwock is not causing any problems, so maybe Darling actually did defeat the Jabberwock at some point between this book and Way to Wonderland. Those are my fan theories. But anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. If you are new here, please subscribe, please like, it really helps. Check out my TikTok, check out my Instagram, check out my Etsy. I sell doll clothes. Also, it is my dream to start my own doll line, and I am currently kind of like conducting research for this doll line. The start of the doll line is kind of like my Etsy with my doll clothes, but I do eventually want to make full-on dolls, and if you want to give me feedback and help me with my development of my doll line, I'm actually doing customer interviews for the development of my doll line, and I just basically want to ask people for feedback about what they're looking for in dolls. So if you'd be interested in letting me interview you, let me know down below or DM me on like TikTok or Instagram. But anyway, thank you guys so much. If you have any questions, always let me know. Also, in terms of like my business and my Etsy, I do accept like custom doll clothing orders. I'll give you like some examples here. So if you ever want a custom doll clothing order, I'll put my business email down below. You can email me. You can also DM me if you have an idea for a custom order. But I think that's everything. Also, before I go, I thought maybe I should give it the full fit. This is an old ballet costume. Fun fact, I actually forgot I had this ballet costume. I had another red ballet costume I was going to wear. And then I went down to my basement where all my old dance costumes are. And I saw this costume and I was like, I forgot that you existed. This one is actually much better fit for Lizzie Hearts than the other one, because the other one was more like an orangey red, and this one's like black and red, and real red, not orangey red. Perfect. Anyway, bye guys. Thank you so much for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Ever After High retelling series. Also guys, I forgot to say, if you watched till the end, comment a red heart for Lizzie Hearts.